You know, a story is about to get wild when the cops show up to arrest a man for camping on his own land. That's exactly what happened to Marcus Green, a quiet, hard-working black rancher who owned over 600 acres just outside a wealthy, newly built neighborhood. At the heart of his ranch sat a wide, sparkling lake, surrounded by tall oaks and willows as sanctuary. The lake wasn't just a piece of land with water, it was history. His grandfather dug out its banks decades ago, stocked it with fish, and made it the family's pride. Marcus grew up swimming there in the summers, learning to cast a fishing rod before he could even ride a bike. And now, as a grown man, it was where he went to clear his head when life got too heavy. That evening, the sky was painted orange and purple, the kind of sunset that seemed like fire spilling across the horizon. Marcus pitched a small tent by the water's edge, tossed a few logs into the fire pit, and set up his folding chair. His old hound Jasper settled onto the grass, resting his gray muzzle on his paws. The rhythmic chirp of crickets and the splash of fish breaking the surface of the lake were the only sounds filling the air. This was the peace Marcus lived for. He cast his fishing line into the water and leaned back. The glow of the fire danced against his face, and the soft crackle reminded him of his childhood when his father used to bring him out there with nothing but a thermos of coffee, a cooler of sandwiches, and stories that lasted long into the night. To Marcus, camping at the lake wasn't just recreation. It was a ritual, a connection to his family, and proof that this land was more than just acres on paper. It was home. But just across the tree line, a very different kind of world existed. A high-end subdivision, only a few years old, stretched its cookie-cutter houses and perfectly paved streets right up against the edge of Marcus's ranch. The homeowners association that ruled that neighborhood with an iron fist had sold the dream of lakefront living to hundreds of families. Brochures had bragged about nature trails with direct lake access and exclusive community recreation areas. The residents had been told the lake was theirs, a shared amenity, even though not a single page of deed or county record gave them the right. To Marcus, it was laughable. But he didn't laugh when he watched strangers build docks, nail benches into his trees, and drag kayaks across his shore. For years, he let it slide. He told himself, people just didn't know any better, that they were misguided but harmless. Sometimes kids biked down paths they shouldn't have. Sometimes families picnicked on the grass by the water. But Marcus didn't chase them off. He had always been a live and let live kind of man. He figured as long as nobody disrespected him or the land, it wasn't worth starting a fight. But on this particular evening, as Marcus stirred the fire and adjusted his lantern, a group of kids on bikes stopped short when they saw him. They whispered among themselves, one pointing at the tent, another at Jasper. Then, without even a hello, they turned their bikes around and sped back toward the subdivision. Marcus frowned, shaking his head. He could already imagine what was happening. Kids running home to tell their parents that some strange man was camping by the lake. He knew exactly where this was headed. Sure enough, less than an hour later, he spotted movement across the water. Flashlights flickered in the dark, and the faint sound of voices carried across the still night air. Standing on the opposite bank was Carol Winters, the HOA president herself, a sharp-faced woman with perfectly styled blonde hair even at night. She raised her phone like she was photographing evidence, her lips moving quickly as she spoke to another board member beside her. Marcus could hear bits and pieces. Trespasser. Legal camping. We need the cops. Marcus exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair. Jasper lifted his head and growled low, sensing his master's irritation. Marcus gave him a calming, "Pat, easy boy. Let M make fools of themselves." And they did. 30 minutes later, red and blue lights began to flash through the trees. The crunch of tires on gravel grew louder as two sheriff's deputies pulled up near the trailhead. The subdivision had illegally cut onto Marcus's property. The fire crackled quietly as Marcus sat calmly in his chair, fishing rod still resting in his hands. Jasper's ears perked up, watching the officers approach. "Evenin', gentlemen," Marcus said with a calm drawl as they stopped a few feet from his fire. The taller deputy with a stern expression spoke first. "Sir, we've had reports of trespassing here at the lake. Some residents are concerned." Marcus almost laughed out loud. Trespassing. That's a good one. Who exactly am I supposed to be trespassing on myself? The shorter deputy frowned. This lake is part of the subdivision, isn't it? They claim you've been camping here without permission. At that, Marcus stood up slowly, his 6'2" frame casting a long shadow in the firelight. He looked each deputy in the eye, then pointed around at the trees, the water, the land that stretched as far as they could see. His voice was steady, but sharp enough to cut through the night. This is my ranch. This lake, these woods, every blade of grass here belongs to me. My family's owned it since before those houses ever existed. You, me, and those busybodies over there, you're all standing on my property right now." The deputies exchanged uncertain glances. Carol, standing nearby with her arms crossed, smirked. "Don't listen to him," she said quickly. "He's squatting. We've been maintaining this lake for years. HOA pays for it, and he doesn't even live here." Marcus turned his gaze to her, his eyes cold. "Lady, I don't need to live in one of your little houses to own this land. I've got deeds, surveys, county maps, of everything. Y'all been playing games on my property without asking, and now you think you can call the law on me? You've got it backward." The taller deputy cleared his throat. "Sir, do you have identification?" Marcus pulled his wallet from his pocket and handed over his driver's license. He knew what was coming next. The deputy took it, radioed into dispatch, and within moments, the truth would pop up on their computer screen. Marcus had been waiting for this day for years, ever since the first HOA sign went up by the water. He had prepared for it, double-checking his records and keeping everything airtight. Carol tried to keep the upper hand, whispering urgently to the deputy. "He's lying. He has no proof. This is community property. Arrest him for trespassing before he causes trouble." Marcus shook his head, letting out a humorless chuckle. "Got some nerve? You've been trespassing on me for years, and now you've got the gall to call the cops. Go ahead, officer. Pull the records. See who's telling the truth tonight." Fire popped loudly, and Jasper let out a low growl that seemed to echo Marcus's simmering anger. The deputies walked back toward their vehicle to check the computer, leaving Marcus and Carol facing each other across the fire's glow. She glared at him, but beneath her confident exterior, he could see a flicker of doubt. Marcus sat back down. Lifting his fishing rod once again, spoke calmly, almost to himself, but loud enough for her to hear. "I let folks walk this land out of kindness, but don't mistake kindness for weakness. You picked the wrong man to play games with." The deputies confirmed the records. Their entire demeanor would soon shift. But in that moment, with the firelight dancing in his eyes and Jasper at his side, Marcus knew one thing for certain: this was just the beginning of a reckoning. The night air was thick with tension as the deputies returned from their patrol. The glow of their computer screens still fresh in their minds. Their faces had changed. Moments ago, they had carried themselves with the quiet confidence of officers, certain they were about to escort a trespasser off community property. But now their postures were looser, their expressions softened, their tone measured. One deputy cleared his throat, glancing at Marcus before looking awkwardly at Carol, who stood with her arms crossed in the shadows. "Mr. Green," the taller deputy began, his voice more respectful this time. "We've confirmed through county records that this land is indeed registered under your name. Every acre around this lake, including the shoreline and access points, belongs to you." Carol blinked, her face draining of color. "But that's not possible," she stammered. "We've been maintaining this lake for years. Our association budgets money every quarter for landscaping, cleanup, even dock repairs. You must be mistaken." Marcus leaned back in his chair, a small, knowing smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. He tossed another log into the fire and let the crackle fill the silence before answering. "You mean you've been using your neighbor's HOA dues to improve my land without my permission? Sounds less like ownership and more like free labor, if you ask me." The shorter deputy tried to keep a straight face, but Marcus saw the twitch of a smile threatening to escape. Carol's mouth hung open, her hands balled into fists at her sides. "This lake is part of our community," she snapped, her voice climbing in pitch. We have rights. We've been advertising it for years, promising our residents lakefront access. Our residents depend on this space. You can't just, ma'am, the taller deputy cut her off, his voice firm now. He's the rightful owner. That means, technically, you and your residents have been trespassing. Building structures, cutting trails, even advertising access, that's all illegal without his consent. The word hung in the air like a hammer striking an anvil. Trespassing Carol faltered. The smug superiority she had walked in with was gone, replaced by a panic she couldn't hide. For the first time, Marcus saw the cracks in her armor. He rose. Slowly from his chair, his tall frame illuminated by the fire's glow. His eyes locked on Carol as he stepped closer, Jasper padding silently at his side. The old dog's gaze just as unyielding as his master's. Marcus's voice was steady, but there was steel in it. For years I've watched you people play house on my land. I saw your signs, your benches, your little gazebo. I didn't raise a fuss because I don't mind folks enjoying the view. But tonight, he gestured toward the flashing lights. Tonight you called the law on me. On me, for being at my own lake. That's not just disrespect, that's arrogance. Carol tried to muster her confidence. We thought, no, Marcus interrupted sharply. You didn't think. You assumed because you had money. Because you had your little board meetings and newsletters and bylaws that you could take what wasn't yours. You assumed I'd be too quiet or too weak to stop you. But I've got news for you, lady, those days are done. The deputies nodded slightly, silently affirming his words. They had seen this sort of thing before, wealthy newcomers pushing out old landowners, writing corners, rewriting history in their favor. But rarely did they see someone as prepared, as grounded, and as unapologetically firm as Marcus Carroll's. Lips trembled. So what are you going to do? Press charges? Sue us. You'll ruin an entire community. Marcus tilted his head, his expression unreadable. Ruin? No. I don't need to ruin anyone. I just need to remind you where the line is. And tonight you all crossed it. The shorter deputy stepped in, clearly eager to defuse the situation. Mr. Green, you're within your rights to restrict access however you see fit. Fences, gates, even legal action if you choose. For now, we'll file a report noting that you are the owner and that any complaints from the HOA regarding this property are invalid. If they continue to trespass, we'll treat it accordingly. Carol's jaw clenched. Can't just cut us off. Our property values our family's. Marcus raised a hand, silencing her. Your property values aren't my problem. You should have thought about that before you lied to your buyers. You built a dream on someone else's foundation. Now the dream's crumbling, and you're looking for someone to blame. That's not on me. The taller deputy gave a polite nod. Mr. Green, is there anything else you'd like us to do tonight? Marcus glanced at Carol, who looked like she might explode at any second. He let the silence stretch, savoring the moment, then he shook his head. No, officers. Think I've made myself clear. Thank you for doing your job. The deputies tipped their hats slightly and retreated to their vehicle, leaving Marcus and Carol in the fire's glow. Jasper let out a low growl again. But Marcus put a calming hand on his head. Carol's voice was smaller now, stripped of authority. You can't just take this away from us. We've invested too much. Marcus's eyes narrowed. You never had it to begin with. You've been living off stolen ground. And when people take what isn't theirs, sooner or later the bill comes due. He turned his back on her then, walking calmly to his tent. Carol stood frozen, her face a mix of rage and dread. For the first time since she had moved into that subdivision, she realized the entire Shao's power meant nothing here. Out here on this land, Marcus was the law. The next morning, Marcus drove into town. He wasn't a man to act on anger alone. He was deliberate, measured. If he was going to end this nonsense once and for all, he would do it the right way. At the county clerk's office, he filed paperwork requesting updated signage permits. Within days, bright new signs appeared around the entire subdivision perimeter. Private property, no trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted. But he didn't stop there. He hired a surveyor to mark every boundary of his land with tall orange stakes, hammering the truth into the ground for everyone to see. Each stake was another nail in the coffin of the HOA's illusion. Residents who had once walked freely down the trails now stopped short, staring at the bold warnings. Parents who had boasted about their lakefront homes now had to explain to their children why they couldn't step foot on the shore. The dock the HOA had built, dismantled piece by piece, by Marcus's hired crew. The benches and gazebo, locked and chained, their community space reduced to wasted wood and metal, the trails choked off with heavy chains and padlocks. The neighborhood buzzed with outrage. At HOA meetings, homeowners shouted at Carol, demanding answers. "You said the lake was ours?" one man yelled. "You told us our property values would skyrocket because of the access?" Carol's defenses crumbled under the pressure. She sputtered excuses, blamed the county, claimed Marcus was being difficult. But the truth spread quickly. The lake had never belonged to them. The brochures, the promises, the sales pitches, it had all been a lie. Some residents tried to confront Marcus directly. They marched up to his gate, shouting that he was selfish, that he was ruining their community. Marcus met them with calm eyes and a firm voice. "This isn't your community. This is my ranch, and I owe you nothing." He didn't raise his voice, didn't lose his temper. That was the part that scared them most. His calm made it clear that he wasn't bluffing, that he had every ounce of control. Behind closed doors, the HOA board scrambled. They consulted lawyers, but the verdict was always the same. Marcus had the deeds, the history, the law. The HOA had nothing. They weren't just powerless. They were guilty of trespassing themselves. Back at his lake, Marcus sat by his fire one evening. Jasper curled at his feet. The water shimmered under the moonlight, untouched and quiet now that the intruders were gone. He breathed in deeply, the smell of wood smoke filling his lungs, and let the silence settle around him. This wasn't just about property, it was about respect. They had tried to erase him, to claim what was his, to treat him like an outsider, on his own land. But now they knew the truth, and he wasn't done yet. The reckoning had only begun. The HOA thought they had Marcus cornered. But after that night by the lake, it was the other way around. Their smug sense of power had evaporated, replaced with the bitter realization that everything they had promised their residents, the lakefront living, the serene trails, the exclusive amenities, had been built on a lie. Their dream community was nothing more than rows of overpriced houses with manicured lawns and no soul. Within weeks, the fallout spread like wildfire. Realtors who once bragged about lake access in their listings suddenly went silent. Prospective buyers backed out of deals when they learned the shimmering lake in the glossy brochures wasn't theirs to use. Homeowners who had poured their savings into those houses were furious. At HOA meetings, voices rose, fingers pointed, and accusations flew. "You lied to us, Carol." One man shouted, slamming his fist on the table. "We paid premium prices for these houses because of the lake." A woman in the back waved a flyer from the subdivision's sales campaign. "It literally says community lake access right here." He said it was ours. "And now we can't even set foot on it without trespassing." Carol Winters, once so sharp and smug, now sat pale-faced at the head of the boardroom table. Perfect hair falling limp. She tried to fight back, her voice cracking as she insisted we didn't know. "The developer told us, but no one wanted excuses. They wanted results. They wanted their lake." Meanwhile, Marcus lived his life untouched by their chaos. He woke up each morning to the sound of Jasper padding along the porch, brewed his coffee strong, and rode out to his lake to fish, camp, or just sit in the quiet. For the first time in years, the shoreline was empty of strangers. No shrieking kids, no HOA banners, no boats dragging across his grass. Just peace. But Marcus wasn't content to stop there. He knew the HOA's arrogance ran deep. They wouldn't give up quietly. If he left things as they were, they'd find some loophole, some lawyer to twist things in their favor. So Marcus did what he always did. He thought ahead. One evening, while tossing scraps to Jasper under the stars, Marcus scribbled notes on a yellow legal pad. By the time the fire burned low, he had a plan. Not just to protect his land, but to turn their greed into his gain. A month later, a new sign appeared at the gated entrance Marcus had built across the only road leading to the lake. The sign read, "Welcome to Green Ranch Lake Club Private. Membership required." Word spread quickly through the county. For a modest fee, families could fish, camp, swim, or picnic at Marcus's lake. He hired a couple of local kids to help maintain the grounds, cleared a few campsites, and built a sturdy dock himself. Memberships sold fast. Folks from outside the subdivision, people who had always respected Marcus and his family, signed up. Eagerly, they loved the idea of supporting a man who stood his ground against the HOA. But here was the twist: the very same HOA residents, who once strutted around the lake as if they owned it now, had to pay Marcus for access. Marcus didn't. Make it cheap. He charged triple what a regular membership cost, a penalty for years of trespass and disrespect. Some residents refused on principle, vowing never to pay that man a dime. But summer rolled around, their kids grew restless, and the lake shimmered just out of reach. Slowly but surely, one by one, they caved. Marcus watched with quiet satisfaction as the same people who had once called the cops on him now stood in line at his gate with checkbooks in hand. The humiliation tore the HOA apart. Property values nosedived. Families fled the subdivision, selling at losses they couldn't stomach. The houses that once promised lakefront living became impossible to market. The HOA scrambled, drowning in lawsuits from furious homeowners who claimed fraud. Their coffers drained from legal fees. Their board meetings devolved into shouting matches and Carol. She was voted out within 6 months. Her neighbors, once loyal followers, now spit her name like a curse. She moved out quietly in the night, a for sale sign going up in her yard, though the house lingered unsold for months. One evening, as Marcus sat on his dock with Jasper at his side, a familiar figure appeared at the gate. It was Carol. She looked smaller somehow, stripped of her polished confidence, her eyes hollow from months of stress. "You ruined everything," she hissed as she stepped closer, her voice trembling. "Do you know what you've done? You've destroyed a community. Families are suffering. People are losing money. Children don't have a safe place to play anymore. All because you couldn't share." Marcus rose slowly, his shadow stretching. Long across the dock, he didn't shout, didn't step forward menacingly, simply looked her in the eye and let the silence weigh heavy before he spoke. "I didn't ruin anything, Carol. You did. You and that board promised people something that was never yours to give. You built a lie, and when I stood in the way of it, you tried to erase me. You called the cops on me at my own lake. You disrespected my family's legacy. I didn't destroy your community, you did, the day you decided your lies mattered more than the truth." Her lips quivered. For a moment, it seemed like she might argue, but the fight had gone out of her. She turned on her heel and walked away, disappearing into the night. Marcus knew that was the last time he'd ever see her. From then on, the story of Marcus Green became local legend. Newspapers ran articles with headlines like "HOA calls cops on landowner, ends up paying him for access and rancher outsmarts. HOA turns lake into private club." People from nearby towns cheered him on, some even driving in to buy memberships to show their support. To them, Marcus wasn't just a man with land. He was proof that ordinary people could stand up too. Arrogance and win. And Marcus. He thrived. His lake club grew, drawing in families, fishermen, and campers from all over the county. But he hired staff, upgraded facilities, and created rules that honored the land instead of exploiting it. Every membership fee went back into the ranch, ensuring the lake stayed clean, the fish plentiful, the peace preserved. But most importantly, Marcus kept what mattered most, his sanctuary. Nights by the fire with Jasper, mornings watching mist rise off the water, days spent fishing under the sun without strangers trampling his grass. He had peace, respect, and justice. One summer evening, as he sat by the fire watching stars dance, across the water, Marcus thought about everything that had happened. He remembered the flashing red and blue lights, the smug look on Carol's face, the word trespassing hurled at him like an insult. He remembered the anger, the humiliation they had tried to force on him. and he remembered the way the deputies. Expressions shifted when the truth came out. Jasper lifted his head and rested it on Marcus's knee. Marcus scratched behind his ears, smiling faintly. "We did all right, old boy. We did better than all right." The HOA had tried to erase him, but in the end, they built his empire. And as the fire burned low and the lake reflected the endless sky, Marcus knew one thing with absolute certainty: this land, this lake, this life would always be his, no matter how hard anyone tried to take it. The end.